Today I'm going to show you how to paint this fall lake scene. Let's go. So before we get started, I'm going to pre-wet the page with a sponge. Because we're going for that misty fall look, I don't want too many hard edges in the painting. Now I'm going in with a base wash of ultramarine blue and a little bit of cobalt blue. As we get down into the lake, I want to have this pop against the sky, so I'm adding in just a bit more ultramarine blue. Now using that pre-mixed yellow ochre on the palette to make a neutral gray, I'm blocking out the path a little bit here, and I'm bringing that value up into the left where the trees are going to be. As well, I'm putting in a little bit between the path and the lake just so that we have some ground there. Now I'm going to mix some burnt sienna with some raw umber just to get some of these trees blocked in. I'll put a lot more of the detail in later, but I really want these trees to start to fade into the background. So now I'm going to mix the leaf color using some yellow ochre, permanent red light, and some azo yellow mid. And I'm adding it to the ground to show the falling leaves. And along the pathway there. I notice this edge is a little bit too hard, so taking a clean brush, I'm just going to blend it out into the path. And I'm taking some more of the mixture and bringing it into the forest on the left, just following the shape of the tree trunks. The paint's pretty watery at this point, so I'm just getting rid of those beads. I don't want those to dry. And going in with a darker brown now, just to blend those trees further into the background, give them some structure, making good use of some wet on wet technique so the tree trunks also blend into the ground. So now I'm adding in some grass along the bank of the lake, using some raw sienna, but it's too orange, and the overall feeling of the painting is that there's a little bit too much orange, so I decided I'm going to bring in some yellow ochre just to contrast the orange of the leaves. Now I want to work on building up the structures of the tree trunks a little bit more, so I'm mixing a very dark brown with some raw sienna, burnt umber, and ultramarine blue, and really starting to define those tree trunks. Next, using a watered down version of that same mixture, I just want to add a little bit of detail to the pathway just to make it stand out a little bit more against the grass on either side. Using a dry brush and a little bit of that mixture watered down, I'm also bringing in some oranges and some browns into the background just so that the path sort of disappears behind that tree line. Now I'm mixing a similar orange to before with some yellow ochre and that permanent red light again, and really putting in the leaves in front of the trees. I'm not trying to add too many leaves at this point, just enough to give the shape of the trees and where they would be. Here I noticed that I lost a bit of the highlights putting in those leaves, so I just took a dry sponge and lifted some of that paint out. Now I'm using a very concentrated mix of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue to get a very dark brown to define those tree trunks a little bit more. I didn't want the tree trunks to stand out from the ground, so I'm using a little bit of yellow ochre while the paint is still wet to blend them in. Now using that same dark brown mixture, I'm starting to put in the tree branches over the lake. I didn't want to add in too many because I liked how the sky and the water looked on the right hand side, but I wanted to have those tree branches hanging over the water. And I'm adding some of that very concentrated dark brown mix to the left hand side as well, just to add a little bit more structure to some of the trees in front. Again, using that same dark brown mixture, I'm adding in a few more rocks to the pathway and watering it down to sort of look like the path has been walked on. I noticed it was too dark, so I used a dry brush to just lift some of the paint out at this point. Now I'm using a little bit of ultramarine blue to add some detail and ripple to the water. I should have done this when the base wash was still wet so that those edges would be soft. And that's something to think about when you approach watercolor painting, is when should I add in certain details and when do I need to because of how wet the paper is. Because the details of the water are too dark, I had to go back in and add some more value to the grass in front of the lake, and just adding in a few more grass details to the other side just to balance out the composition. Using that dark brown mixture and a little bit more blue, I'm adding in some rocks to the lake, and using a sponge, adding in some leaves with some more yellow ochre. And with that, the painting is pretty much done. If you enjoyed watching the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.